If you've been here attending this seminar, then of course you know Bernardine, who's the mastermind behind this amazing event, but I'll still give everyone a short intro now. I wanted to connect to last year's event, though, which was called Diverse Voices, New Directions, and that had a focus on Black and Asian British writing, really. And I recall speaking to people after the event, and we felt last year, that the multicultural take on that topic was very valid and important, clearly, but that diversity could mean more than multiculturalism and Black and Asian writing. And in that sense, I think this year's topic was a continuation of the debates, of the conversations that happened last year. And I think that's really good, how those two seminars have been linked together, really. And I'm so pleased how productive this has been. I'm grateful to, everything that Bernardine has put in here. And I was really happy to note that Katina Butler earlier said, there will be another seminar next year. I don't think we know the topic yet, but we can look forward to another program. Anyway, but I'm here to introduce Bernardine. She's published, as I think 8 books of fiction and verse fiction. And these are books that deal with different aspects of the African diaspora, past and present, real and imagined. Her latest book is Mr. Loverman, a text we focused on last year, and her other books include Lara, Blonde Roots, Soul Tourists, as well as The Emperor's Babe, and that's one of the books Bernardine will be reading from later. And there's also Hello Mum, and again, she'll read from that. In this seminar, it became clear that writing is really a power, a force in the world, and good writing, can move people to do things. It can move us to reflect, it allows us to refract, to change our perspectives. And I think Bernardine is a writer who moves you, who moves us, who moves me, certainly. So I have a daughter, she's 8 years old, and her mother and I were moved to call our daughter Lara, in line with a book that Bernardine has written. So thanks for that name. And I think that is just a little example to say, right? A writer does something, it has repercussions in the world. And the seminar we've just been through these last 3 days is another such example, right? The discussions we've had, the readings we've heard, etc., they will surely have an impact. Now, Bernardine's works in such a wide range of genres, apart from the ones I've already mentioned. So she's written short stories, essays, lit crit, poetry, of course. She's worked for the theatre, for the radio. She's presented on the radio, etc. She's extremely versatile. She's also edited. And there's, for example, NW15 for the British Council and Granta in 2006. And she did the centenary issue of Poetry Review in 2012. And she goes on writing tours, or trips, I should say. She's done 150 of them. They're all listed on the website. The website is fabulous. If I'd come to the end of the website, I'd probably have been late tonight, so it's really a good website, thank you. She's had a number of distinguished fellowships, and one I want to mention is the Montgomery Fellow at Dartmouth College in the US, and also, of course, she's the Professor of Creative Writing at Brunel University in London. On top of that, she has chaired and judged many literary prizes: the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Caine Prize for African Writing, the Goldsmith Prize for Innovative Fiction, T.S. Eliot Award for Poetry, the Orange Award for New Writers, and the National Poetry Competition. She founded her own poetry prize. Well, not her own, but she founded a poetry prize at Brunel. It's called the Brunel International African Poetry Prize. She did that 6 years ago in 2012. And that really brought African poetry to the fore. And again, so these acts are meaningful and they change how we look at writing and how we look at the world. She also founded the Complete Works. And the Complete Works is a poet mentoring scheme for poets of color. She did that in 2006, 12 years ago. And there are about 30 poets who have gone through that program. and they are achieving publication and critical success. And there is, one of them is here, Nick Makoha is here, of course, Worcestershire, Karen McCarthy-Wolf, Malika Booker, who was here last year, Mona Arshi. So it's a lot of well-known writers who have benefited from this initiative. So I think it's fair to say, apart from being a creative writer, Bernardine is a literary activist, right? She's really putting a lot of energy into this, and this seminar was just another example of that. She's won a number of awards for her writing, but you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from her. So I will cut this list a bit short, right? But she won, for Mr. Loverman, the Publishing Triangle Pharaoh Grumley Award in the US, the Jerwood Fiction Uncovered Prize in the UK, and other awards include the Amma Best Book Award, the Orange Youth Panel Award, and the Arts Council of England Award. She was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in 2006, and she was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 2004. Then she joined their council in 2016, and last year she became Vice Chair of the Royal Society of Literature. She's also a Fellow of the English Association, and she was appointed an MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours List in 2009. So, all of that I think is exciting and impressive. I just want to let you know how we'll proceed from this point. Bernardine will read from two books, from The Emperor's Babe, as well as from Hello Mum, and we're being treated to some unpublished material as well. And then we'll have a conversation, and then we'll open it up to you, and then we'll all go downstairs to the club, don't forget. All right, so thanks very much, and I'll hand over.
Thanks very much, Mark. Hello, everybody. Thanks for staying for this. So, as Mark said, I'm going to give you a sort of insight into three of my works. The first one is going to be The Emperor's Babe, which was relaunched late last year by my publisher, Penguin. And so it's kind of gained currency again. It was first published in 2001. And it's a book about a black girl who grows up in Roman London 2,000 years ago. And I had a residency at the Museum of London in 1999, and I remember walking around the Roman galleries, and I knew that Africans had been in Britain 1,800 years ago. And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great to start writing some poems about a black girl who grows up in Roman London? I mean, I might tell you more about that when I talk to Mark, but in the end, it ended up being this book, which is a novel in verse, about a girl called Zuleika, whose parents come from Sudan in East Africa, and they travel across those very good Roman roads, and they settle in Roman London, and she grows up in the city, and she ends up having an affair with the Roman emperor, Septimius Severus, who was a real Roman emperor, who really came to Britain in 211 AD, and he was from Libya, so he was from North Africa. So it's a novel in verse, so I'll just sort of give you a taster of some of the sections. This is the prologue, and it's called Amo Amas Amat. Who do you love? Who do you love? When the man you married goes off for months on end, quelling rebellions at the frontiers, or playing hotshot senator in Rome, his flashy villa on the Palatine Hill, home to another woman, I hear, one who has borne him offspring. My days are spent roaming this house, its vast mosaic walls full of the scenes on Olympus, for my husband loves melodrama. They say his mistress is an actress, a flaxen Fraulein type from Germania Superior. Oh, everyone envied me, Illa Bella Negrita, born in the back of a shop on Gracechurch Street, who got hitched to a Roman nobleman, whose parents sailed out of Khartoum on a barge. No burnished throne, no poop of beaten gold, but packed with vomiting brats, and cows releasing warm turds onto their bare feet. Thus perfumed, they made it to Londinium on a donkey, with only a thin purse and a fat dream. Here in the drizzle of this Wild West town, Dad wandered the streets looking for work, but there was no room at the inn, so he set up shop on the curb and sold sweet cakes which Mum made. He's told me this story a milli times. Now he owns several shops, selling everything from vino to shoes, veggies to tools, and he employs all sorts to work in them: Assyrian, Tunisian, Jew, Persian, hopefuls just off the olive barge from Gaul, in fact, anyone who'll work for Pebbles. When Felix came after me, Dad was in ecstasy, father-in-law to Lucius Aurelius Felix, no less. I was spotted at the bars of Cheapside, just budding, and my fate was sealed by a man thrice my age and thrice my girth, all at sweet 11. Even then, Dad thought I was getting past it. Then I was sent off to a snooty Roman bitch called Clarissa for decorum classes, learnt how to talk, eat and fart, how to get my amo, amas, amat right, and ditch my second-generation plebby Creole. Zuleika accepta est, Zuleika delicata est, Zuleika bloody goody two-shoes est. But I dreamt of creating mosaics, of remaking my town with bright stones and glass. But no, numquam, it's not allowed. Sure, Felix brings me presents when he deigns to come west. I've had Chinese silk, a marble figurine from Turkey, gold earrings shaped like dolphins, and I have the deepest fondness for my husband. Of course, sort of, though he spills over me like dough, and I'm tempted to call cook mid-coitus to come trim his sides so that he fits me. Then it's puff and chow, baby, solitudo, solitude, solituda. So this is the book starting now. This is called Londinium Tour Guide, unofficial, and Zuleika has a best friend called Alba. 1 minute, it's hopscotch in bare feet. Next, you're 4 foot up in a sedan, in case your pink stockings get dirty. No one prepared me for marriage. Me and Alba were the wild girls of Londinium, sought to discover the secrets of its hidden hearts, still too young to withhold more than we revealed, to join this merry cast of actors. She was like a rag doll who'd lost its stuffing. Spiky brown hair kept short 'cause of knits. Everyone said she was either anorexic or had worms. But Alba was so busy chasing the dulcis vita that she just burnt everything she ate before it turned to fat. She dragged me out on dangerous escapades. We were partners in crime, banditos, renegades. She said there was more to life than playing with friggin' dolls, like causing trouble and discovering what grown-ups did in private without getting caught. We were going to steal from the rich, give to the poor, keep 75% for ourselves, and live in one of them mansions with 1,000 slaves feeding us cakes all day, every day. But until such time, her dad owned the butchers next door but one. Mine couldn't care less what I did. His precious son Catullus got the abacus and wax. I got the sewing kit and tweezers. He was even bought a ponytail for his curly little head, so he'd fitted in at school with all those trendy Roman kids. Bless his sockless feet. Imagine. Some days we'd tour the tenements of Aldersgate. He'd trail behind like a giant sloth, his big muddy eyes under sleepy hoods, just like his father's, and plead with us to slow down. I'd tell him to footuo off, you little runt, leaving him behind as we raced towards the slums, swarming with immigrants, freed slaves and factory workers. We'd play knock-down ginger, throw stones, break windows, then leg it down an alley out of sight, arrive home breathless and itching with flea bites and jiggerfoot. What with the alfresco sewerage running between paving stones. Now, in my neighbourhood, summer evenings were spiced, trout fried on stalls, fresh out of the Thames. You could eat air or run home for supper in the back yard Dad called an atrium. That's if the rush hour traffic allowed. Carts clogged up the main drag to the Forum, unloading produce from up country or abroad. Sometimes I'd hear a solitary flute through the open window and stop, breathing. Later, we'd sneak out for the vicarious thrill of the carnal experience. Like two Toms, we'd prowl the darkened alleys, our noses sniffing out the devastating odour of sex. Peeping through candle-lit shutters, we were amazed at the adult need to strip off and stick things in each other. Men and women, women and women, men and men, multiples of all sorts groaning in pain. Absolutely fascinatio. And then we encountered death, Lucan Africanus, the baker of Fenchurch. I was the daughter he never had, he said, though his eyes spelt wife. Gave us fresh bread dipped in honey. Our thanks, to raid his store one night, find his great black rigor mortis self in a cloud of flour, 2 burnt buns for cheeks, too much yeast in his bowels, emptied on the floor. That stopped our missions for a while. Some nights we go to the river, sit on the beach, look out towards the marshy islands of Southwark and beyond to the jungle that was Britannia, teeming with spirits and untamed humans. We try to imagine the world beyond the city, that country a lifetime away that Mum called home and Dad called prison, the city of Roma, which everyone went on about as if it were so bloody mirabilis. We talk about the off-duty soldiers who loitered in our town everywhere. They were everywhere, watching for lumps on our chests to see if our hips grew away from our waists, always picking me out, plucking at me in the market. Is our little aubergine ready? No, I'm not, you stinking pervs, I'd growl, skedaddling hot foot out of their reach. Sometimes we'd hear grunting on the beach and imagine some illicit extramarital action was in progress. We'd call out in our deepest, gruffest voices, "Hey, polizia!" and rock with laughter because we'd interrupted their flipping coitus. We'd hear them tripping over themselves as they scuffled off. And then everything changed. I got engaged. I wasn't allowed out no more. I had to act ladylike, and Alba said it wouldn't be the same once I'd been elevated. This is called The Betrayal. Time to leave your mother, dear. You're ready for a man. That's by Horace. First I heard of it was overheard when I came home unexpectedly early from the baths, because it was overcrowded, and as usual they told me to come back later. As I dawdled up our street, busy with shoppers, tired of having to say salve and bani gratias at every step to neighbours who didn't give a toss about what I felt, wondering if Alba could come out to play, glad that spring was here after a long winter when I'd had to wrap my feet in rags or else they'd fall off. I saw a fancy sedan parked up outside our shop and 4 bronze sedan bearers wearing white linen skirts with gold stripes, leaning against the wall, waiting. I ran the rest of the way, found the shop closed. I heard voices, put my ear to the door. "See, Mr. Felix, Zuleika very obedience girl, sir. No problemata. She make very optima wife, sir." Glad to hear it, for when I saw her at the baths, she stole my heart. Indeed, she is so exquisita, so polkarima, such a delicious surprise in this, shall we say, less than dazzling little colonia. She reminds me of the girls back in Egyptus, where I spent most of my teenage years. My father was governor there, you know. I like the mysterious dark ones from the south who would oil my limbs, waft soundlessly around me, leaving the lingering scent of musky sandalwood from Zanzibar in their wake. I had been looking for a wife for some time, and naturaliteur, I wanted someone young, someone specialis, a rare flower. See, Mr. Felix, Zuleika, very specialis girl. Yes, always at home, quietly sewing, very placid, no backchat. Good. I have enjoyed bachelorhood to its utmost on Larmony, but the fiend loneliness has become a most unwelcome friend. I intend to make this my far western base, and I need to warm my home with a wife. I'm a man of multiple interests. A senator, military man, businessman. I undertake trading missions for the government, and I'm a landowner. I've just bought Hertfordshire, you know. Yet I've never been interested in the plethora of simpering debutantes who are paraded in the cattle market balls every season, mothers thrusting their powdered, wrinkled cleavages at me, supposedly on behalf of their darling, twittering daughters. My own dear mater died young, you know. She was so very benevola. I missed her terribly when I was a boy. I still do. Perhaps that is why it has taken me so long to tie the knot, so to speak. To form an attachment is to risk its loss, is it not? I have been looking for a nice, simplex, quiet, fidelis girl, a girl who will not betray me with affairs, who will not wear me out with horrid fights, unlike my pater's subsequent 3 wives, who made my life hell and his, who were of the hedonistic breed of aristocratic matroni, determined to compete with the husband in all spheres, ever boastful of their sexual shenanigans, humiliating the dear gentleman in public, and prepared to argue until dawn on matters of politics, world affairs, and the arts. Have you heard that women now dress up in male attire and compete in chariot races? It has got quite out of hand in the fatherland. Nor do I want one with cumbersome baggage. Is my load not heavy enough? I will, of course, see to an educatio for her and lessons in elegantia. She is of the age where she will learn quickly. Do not worry about her dowry. It is of no consequentia to me, of course. You will greatly benefit from this negotium. I think we can safely say that your business is due to expand considerably. You are very benignous gentlemen, sir. Road has been uphill, almost vertical for years. A boost to economia, most welcome, sir. Say no more, you have my patronage. I looked through a large crack in the door, there were many, and saw an old man, much taller than my small father, who was so thin that day, his stoop resembling a frozen bow. The man was much fatter than Pops too. He was, in a word, obesus. His smooth, olive-skinned face wore the haughty expression of a true patrician. His thinning brown hair was cut in the fashionable pudding bowl haircut. His orange and white striped toga was of sumptuous linen that fell in elegant folds. He wore several gold rings with bright stones, and when my eyes moved slowly down, I saw his legs, thin, hairy, and bandy. At which my own took me rapidly down the street, not even stopping at Alba's. No words could form yet. I ran until I reached the sloping banks of the River Fleet, far away from the docks. And then I screamed at the water until my throat was sore and my spittle had dried up, not caring that all the fishermen thereabouts stopped mending their nets and stared. I stayed for hours, and when it was dark, the beach deserted, I stripped off, threw my tatty green dress onto pebbles, walked into the cold water, and swam far out, shivering. It is what I needed to calm me down. I had done it before. When I turned around, the city was lit up with lamps and torches flickered in windows, the doorways of houses on the hills. I knew I had to accept my fate. I could throw countless tantrums. I was an expert, but it would go ahead regardless. The man's voice carried such utter imperium, and he expressed such an awful desire for me. I swam towards the lights, forcing myself to conquer the cold water before my body seized up with cramp. My frozen limbs struggled up the beach. My dress instantly soaked. I ran back through the deserted streets, feeling my blood warm up, my joints becoming fluid again. The only sound was of my sandaled feet on hardened earth, my harsh, panting breaths. I called for Alba. She heard from the back where they slept, but she came quickly to the door, took one look at me, ran back inside, returned to wrap me up in her grey blanket that scratched my wet skin like thistles. She made me sit down, just the two of us, for few dared walk around after dark. She rubbed my back. Zeeks, what's up? So I'm going to move on now. So she's in this marriage with Felix, and she's now 18, and the emperor's come to town. Zuleika goes to the theatre. The emperor was in town, and some politicos were staging a show to suck up to him. My slaves, Valeria and Amelia, adorned me beautifully, and I wore my favourite wig, which I'd bought of an Arabian girl who was waiting tables at a takeaway cafe in Bond Court. It ran black and thick to her buttocks. Amelia cut it off there and then and took it straight to my wig maker in Threadneedle Street. Now it's piled up in intricate plaits and twists with ivory combs and jangling hairpins, guaranteed to make ears prick up upon my arrival anywhere. Felix left on business 3 weeks ago. Dad sent me a theatre ticket. He makes more of an effort now Catullus is away at boarding school. And I was carried through the riotous streets to the Guildhall Theatre. Riffraff were fighting each other to get into the stalls. The police were forming barricades. People had been known to murder over seats. My entourage followed with cushions, chicken drumsticks, apples, bread, saucers, and an urnful of yellow wine. The play began, a commedia featuring the fool Papas and the greedy clown Madicus. It was cheap entertainment for the masses. It was tiresomely predictable, the audience predictably boisterous, shouting, laughing, and cussing all around me. I wasn't in the mood. My mind wandered inside itself, where it was happiest. Was this the highlight of my day, my week, my month? Was this my life? Then strangely, I felt heat on my right cheek, as if a flaming torch were being held too close. The emperor was seated on a throne, some distance to my right, surrounded by the excited hullabaloo of the male hoi polloi. And I knew without looking that his desert eyes were roaming over my voluptuous corpus. My breasts had become a sensitive second pair of eyes. I glanced slyly over. I was right. So the emperor courts her and she invites him to dinner, and this is called Venus Winks at Lovers' Games. Songbird surprise was my favorite dish, and I knew it would be his. From first sighting, I had imagined being crushed into the imperialis purple robes of Emperor Septimius Severus, his sword drawn out of its gold and ruby scabbard and plunged into me ruthlessly. Oh, sweet death. We were together, finally, in my triclinium, a lyre player in the background, as we reclined on sofas, the low marble table laid out with a little spread, served in my floral red Samian crockery. Small songbirds soaked in asparagus sauce with quail's eggs, dormice cooked in honey and poppy seed, salted fish with oyster dressing, my lord, milk-fed snails just for you, fried jellyfish, bear cutlets, sliced flamingo tongue marinated in turmeric and clove oil, am filling my hunger, par-cooked courgettes boiled whole, sautéed peacock brains melt in my mouth. You look across, am stuffed, dates torn between my teeth, sow's udders, lark's tongue in gall garlic spiced with perfumed peacock feathers and peppered rose petals, sweet wine cakes to follow, olives with thyme is on our side, all drowned down with finest African wine. We were silent, letting oils drip over lips and chins, watching each other lick it up with acrobatic tongues. He was solid like a gladiator, my Libyan, my lover-to-be, my libidinous warrior, my belcher. His black eyes following the slope of my shoulders, my shimmering cerise gown, décolleté, fastened with sapphire clasps, set in gold, flattering my shining bazookas, the rise and fall with each excited breath. He was in Britannia, waging war, he said, would leave when the whole of Caledonia had been taken from Hadrian's Wall to the Antonine Wall and way up to the North Sea. His marriage was impossibility, he said. His wife had gone from swan to donkey. He knew Felix well, had often dined with him at his villa in Rome, news to me. He called me to him, nibbled my neck, his harsh bristles scratching my delicate skin, stuck his tongue down my ear, making me squeal, growled, "Are you ready for war?" This is called My Legionarius, and it starts with a poem by Suleika. I like you two ways. Either take off your crown of laurels and drop your purple robes to the floor and come to me naked as a man, or dress up. Real soldiers wear tunics under armor. My emperor does without. Stands before me, metal bands tied with leather straps over a bull's chest. Iron wings protect shoulders from flying sabers. I finger your second skin, my lord, cold, polished, my reflection cut into strips. Your tawny trunks perfumed with juniper oil, hard with squeezing the damp flanks of stallions, dagger gripped for my forging. Are you ready for war, soldier? A centurion's crested helmet and visa, curve of dramatic bristle. Like an equus, you roll your head, lightly brush my inner thighs, leaving a trail of goosebumps and giggles, then trace the tip of your sword down the center of my torso. Dare I breathe? Let your root map a thin red line. Silver goblets of Burgundy vino by my bedside to toast the theater of war. Close your eyes, you command, a freezing blade on my flamed cheek, hand around my neck. I am your hostage. I am dying of your dulcet conquest. You make my temples drip into my ears, whisper obscenities, plant blue and purple flowers on my barren landscape. Here, besiege me, battery ram my forted gateway, you archer, stone slinger, trumpeter, give it to me, futuo me, my actor, emperor. I hold the pumping cheeks that rule the world, I do. Ditch the empire on your back, Septimius. It is crushing my carriage, the weight of a soldier trained to march 30 kilometers a day, marching for centuries over roads made with crushed skulls, legions forming an impregnable walking tortoiseshell on the battlefield, on your back, making the whole world Roman. Vidi, vici, veni. Take off your victory. I am vanquished already. I can't fight you. Just stab me to death again and again. Stab me to death, soldier. And this is called Post-Coital consciousness. Suspended on feathers, we were borne on wind, windows framed azure sky, far off, silver wicks flickering, embroidered silk throws, thrown to the ground were crushed indigo and crimson, anemones we did not stir, soaked. Anonymous limbs sprawled, a brutish arm sweetly limp on my shoulder, deep breaths inflating his chest, lifting mine, melded chin into moist arc of thick neck. Midsummer, midnight memory blaze. Not since the first months of life had I felt another complete myself. I knew not where I began. And the final piece I'm going to read is called Vivat Zuleika. It's the epilogue. It is you I have found to wear, Zuleika, lying in a panel of summer, your golden couch moved into the atrium to feed your skin for the last time. I enter quietly from Watling Court, the pounding bass and horns of the city's square miles suspended. Between two columns, your couch faces a pool fed by the aching stone mouth of Medusa. A cloud chills you in its shadow of passing. Zuleika moratora est. Now is the time. I glide to where you lie, look upon your pink robes, ruched décolleté, a mild stir with each tired breath, pronounce mold of your face, obsidian with light and sweat. So tranquilla in your moment of leaving, I slip into your skin. Our chest stills, drains to charcoal. You have expired, Zuleika, and I will know you from the inside. Thank you. So that's from The Emperor's Babe. Now for something completely different. I wrote a quick read, and I've noticed, I think, a couple of the other writers have written quick reads. So they're books that are published every year. I think they publish about 10 different writers who write books for people who wouldn't normally read fiction. And they're called quick reads, and they're very cheap. And I wrote one called Hello Mum, which is about a young black boy growing up in an estate in London. And I'll just give you a sense of his life and his voice. Hello, Mum. I knew some madness was going to kick off that day. As I walked through the estate, it was so hot, I thought the tarmac would melt and my feet sink into the road. Serious. I thought the air would burst into flames and the parked cars explode like bombs. Within minutes, my jeans, t-shirt and socks stuck to me like that disgusting hair grease you use. And all I wanted was to wrap my hands around a nice cold can of Coke from the shops. When I complained about the heat that morning, you said you was going to buy me shorts and sandals from Primark, which made me crack up. Mum, shorts and sandals? What planet are you on? Yeah, if I was like 5, yeah, I'd get beaten up before I even reached the high street, by my own boys too, for bringing shame on them. Everyone was escaping their boiling hot flats that afternoon, and everyone looked up when a police helicopter began to circle noisily in the sky. It was like a mosquito you wanted to squash but couldn't reach. At night, their red beams swooped down like they was hunting animals, when all I was doing was just standing around chatting nonsense with my boys. It was pure pressure. I looked up at the top floor balconies and wondered when the next person would chuck themselves off. Thump. The postman found the last one. I made up lyrics about it. Another man down, blood on the ground, lost then found, get used to the sound. Another man down, don't stick around, you can't take flight, suicide heights. I used to lie in my room at night, expecting to see dead bodies falling outside my window like in films. Nice place I had to live in, thanks. Geriatrics were shading themselves on the lower balconies underneath lines of washing. You used to say, old people are vulnerable, be kind to them. No way, I tell you, they hated teenagers. Given half the chance, they'd burn us all in gas ovens like Hitler, no doubt. One time, I was standing by the bins with my boys when that old man from number 32 came up to dump his black rubbish bag. He wore a dirty old man's coat, even though it was summer. He was stooped and short, so you could see his bald head with brown spots on it like tea stains. Then, when he turned to leave, he whacked my legs with his walking stick. Can you believe it? I hadn't done nothing, yeah? It hurt too. I should have whacked him back. Delmar spat at him, and I shouted out, I'll tell the police he tried to touch me up. Plenty witnesses, man, plenty witnesses. We all jeered, pedo, as he hobbled off. Girls in short skirts with legs like burnt sausages were dancing outside one of the ground floor flats. Rihanna's Disturbia was blasting out from a sound system, like they were in a hip-hop video or something. Not. It disturbied me, I tell you, bunch of wannabes. They was covered in that face crap girls wear to hide the fact that they're dogs. The dance was called the migraine skank. You put your hands over your ears as if you got a headache, then shake your head from side to side while bending over. I got a headache just looking at them. Pure stupidness. I hope Chantel wouldn't turn out like them. I think Chantel was the best thing in my life. I know it sounds sissy, but I loved it when she fell asleep on my lap and I had to carry her to bed without waking her. You love her too, Mum, more than me, because she's no trouble. Don't lie. Youngers were kicking a football about like they was in the World Cup final, Brazil versus Italy. A car window was just waiting to be smashed in. You'd blame them. Go on about kids being vandals these days. But not me. Where else was they going to play? Every little kid had been warned that the park next door was full of perverts and child murderers, so they weren't allowed inside. A big, big park, and it was empty. Nice one. All right, JJ, a couple of them called out. Mickey and Derek, about 8 years old, I reckon. I nodded back, hands in pockets. I was starting to get their respect. It felt good. You used to talk about the good old days in the 1980s when you spend the whole summer playing in the park, pretending it was the countryside. The good old days before the youth club was shut down and they organised things for you and your mates to do. The good old days when the estate was new and before the riots happened that you said ruined everything. The good old days when you had no son called Jerome to make your life a misery. So if the 1980s was the good old days, that meant I lived in the bad new days, right? Mum, this is what my life was like, and for once, you can't answer back. Home. My room wasn't a room, it was a cupboard. If I stood in the middle of it and stretched my arms out, I could touch both walls. As I got taller, the room got smaller. There wasn't even space for drawers or a wardrobe, and I was so fed up having to stuff my clothes and old teddies on them wonky shelves you put up on the walls. Tidy your room, Jerome, you'd moan, as if you lived in it and not me. Like, what's the point making my bed in the morning when it's going to get messed up again at night? Pure madness. When Delmar came round, I had to hide the teddies in that baggy woolen jumper you bought for me last birthday. Mum, no one wears jumpers. Oh, and before I forget, say hello to Barnaby, the one-eyed bandit, for me. You'll find him in the jumper. Lol, that means laugh out loud. LMAO means laughing my arse off. You know what? We lived in the same flat, but we didn't even speak the same language. You was always going on at me. Why don't you speak properly anymore, Jerome? Mum, you had no idea what my life was like. No way could I speak all la-di-da like Harry Potter and survive in this hood. Every time I open my mouth, I get beaten up. My bedroom's still the same, isn't it? My things are still there, aren't they? You haven't thrown them away. That's like throwing me away. I bet you have. You have, haven't you? I bet you've given my room to Chantel and taken down my Scarface poster. The wickedest film ever made, man. Al Pacino playing the great gangster Tony Montana. He was my hero and everyone else's. Why? Obvious. He was a nobody who became a somebody. He did what he had to do. And by the way, you're the only person in the world who hated that film, I swear. Remember how I liked to watch MTV Cribs on the telly? All those rappers' Hollywood-style homes with big white walls and massive posters of Scarface, yeah? They'd have fridges the size of our kitchen and bathrooms bigger than our sitting room, chill-out room, games room, recording studio, study with no books in it, you get me? Gardens the size of a football pitch, garages with enough cars lined up outside, BMW, Mercedes, Rolls-Royce Phantom, Lamborghini Roadster, Hummer H2, Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren, Porsche GT3, Aston Martin DB9, Ferrari 360. I wanted it all. Of course I did. Everyone does. That's a fact. Get rich or die trying, as my man 50 Cent said. Big house, plenty dollar, expensive cars, that's what I'm talking about. We didn't even have a flat screen telly, which was embarrassing when Delmar came round. And another thing, Mum, you was always going on at me to work harder at school, but you hated my lyrics. Like, if I'd have called it poetry, you'd have told the whole world. Put on that posh voice you use at parents' evening at school. Jerome writes poetry. Isn't my boy clever? You was well proud of me when I came top of the class my last year at primary school. I think that was the last time I did anything you liked. I didn't mind you putting the trophy over the fireplace then, but it was embarrassing when I got older. Not cool, Mum, not cool. By the end of my first year at secondary school, I stopped being the class creep and dropped down to number 17 out of 29 pupils. You went ballistic. Typical school report, Jerome can do well when he puts his mind to it, but he's easily distracted. Check this, Mumsy. You can't be a nerd at secondary school and be liked by the people who count. You can't waste your time reading books when you're a teenager either. That's for when I'm old, like you. Oh, I forgot. Happy birthday for last Sunday. You might be 34, but you don't look a day over 40. Jokes, man, jokes. I did make you laugh, though. Most definitely. Don't lie, I did. Anyway, you can talk. If you hadn't left university because you was pregnant with me, you could have become a school teacher like you wanted. Then we live in a proper house with a garden and everything. If I had to write a school report for you, it would go like this. Kimmisy Cole-Wallace could have done well, but she was easily distracted. LMAO. Listen, I had to escape our dump that afternoon. Chantel was watching cartoons in the sitting room. Sometimes I joined her just because she made me laugh when she got so excited at all the silliness on the telly. But I wasn't in the mood that day. And you was in the kitchen frying onions and garlic, so the whole flat stank. You knew I hated that smell, so why didn't you close the kitchen door? I was suffocating to death in my cupboard, what with the heat. And you know that window only opened out a crack in case I fell out when I was a kid. Except I wasn't a kid no more, right? So why didn't you get the council to fix it? And another thing, how did you expect me to stay in that roasting prison cell of a room all the time? I could only walk 14 steps in the whole flat. Then, when I told you I was going out, you started giving me a hard time as usual. One minute you were saying I was the man of the house, the next you wanted me on curfew. I'm off, Mum, see you later. You think so? That depends on whether I bolt the door or not, doesn't it? Oh, come on, don't start, I'll be back soon. Soon never comes soon enough with you. What time you want me back then? 9 o'clock. If you're a minute late, you can sleep in the hallway outside. Why? Because I, for one, will not be moving my butt from my sofa in the middle of my film to unbolt my door to my tearaway son. Well, seeing as I'm giving you so much grief, I might as well leave home, yeah? Is that a big 14-year-old man talking? Can't even grow a beard yet, can't vote, can't leave school, can't drive a car, can't drink, can't smoke, can't rent a flat, can't open a bank account without my permission, can't leave the country without my permission, can't do anything, in fact, without my permission. So where are you going to go exactly? Sleep rough on the streets with those dirty, drunk, druggy, homeless people out there? You go on and have a nice life, dear. Plenty places, actually. Delmar will sort me out. What? That boy is close friends with the devil. You be back by 9 or I'll ground you for 2 weeks. It's time you began to listen to your mother and stop your damn rudeness. Yeah, whatever. Bam. I slammed the front door and leapt down the stairs 3 at a time with some new lyrics forming in my head. Reality must be found. Don't get pushed around. Stand up for your rights. Fight with all your might. I'm surprised that door didn't break the number of times I slammed it. You was always stressing me out, Mum. You could make me angrier than anyone else in the world. You was ruining my life with your moaning. I couldn't wait to be older and do things my way. So that's hello, Mum.
Well, thanks. Is this on? Yeah. Thanks very much. Great to hear your voice. And Bernie just said she'll read from the unpublished work in a little while. So we have time for a bit of a conversation. I have to say, you know, when you read from The Emperor's Babe, the visceral quality of the writing, it really affects you. I mean, there were lots of laughs, of course, about some of the scenes. The encounter between the emperor and Zuleika, that really, you know, affects you as well. But when you describe the eating, right, you get really hungry. I don't know whether you felt like that, but, you know, that was amazing. So I'm wondering, you know, I know you were at the Museum for London, and I know you did a lot of research for this, but those dishes, do they exist? Or some of them you made up? And some of them,
no, they're all real dishes, yeah.
So, and you found the sources in the museum, basically?
No, I did a lot of research for the book, so I bought about 40 books about the Romans.
Wow.
And, you know, in fact, I think one of the things that runs through my books is food. I love using food to express culture and class and race and all kinds of things. And, yeah, so there's a lot of food in this book.
I mean, fried peacock brain, you know, it's not exactly
Sounds
appealing,
good.
But it does sound good. I really, you know, if there was a restaurant serving what you have in the book, I might go there.
Actually, there was a Roman restaurant. This book, I had a sort of meeting with my publisher and publicist, and it was in a Roman restaurant in West London.
That's amazing. But the other element that's striking about the novel and your other writing, I think, is the humor in there, right? Certainly Zuleika and the antics she gets up to, you know, you make us laugh. It is also, you know, there's some seriousness in that book, but it's a very funny read at the same time. And I'm always wondering, you know, what is it like when you write like that? Are you laughing as you write? You know, are you thinking, will my readers find this funny? Or does the humor just sort of creep in and it
kind of creeps in, you know. What I found really interesting about, you know, watching all the other writers at the seminar, who I just think, exceptionally amazing, was the humour in almost everybody's work, you know, and people were explaining it in different ways. For me, the humour works differently in different books, so I think the humour is probably the character Zuleika. I decided I was going to create a very feisty Roman girl who, you know, is in a terrible situation, you know, married off to this older man, in some senses has a terrible life, but I wanted her to have a rebellious spirit. I don't think I ever create characters, female characters, who are victims. You know, they always have some inner resistance, whether they're Zuleika or you know, Doris, who's a white slave in Blonde Roots, and so on and so forth. So I wanted her voice to be a spiky voice, and then you know, Latin crept into the text, and then I started playing around with the Latin. I did study Latin for 5 years at school, so maybe if I hadn't, I wouldn't have been so confident. You know, I don't remember any of it, but I might not have been so confident using it. And then the book is very anachronistic. So it's set 1,800 years ago, but as you could probably tell from some of what I read, there are a lot of contemporary references. You know, people wear Gucci and Versace, and it's a performance poetry party, and, you know, there are all these things happening. And I had a lot of pleasure, and that was the first time I'd ever done that in a book. I had a lot of pleasure playing around with time and place and space, and you know, just treating the history as irreverently as I think it can be treated. Because when I wrote this book, I felt that the British historians had created this sort of reverent impression of sort of classical Roman and Greek history. And as a fiction writer, I like to disrupt and subvert, and I'm very iconoclastic. You know, I like to have fun and poke fun and sort of pull the rug from underneath any kind of pomposity. And I feel that that's what I was doing with that, you know, because you know, they go to the toilet, of course they do, and they're farting and they're belching, and, you know, there's something of Frankie Howard in there too. For British people might remember Frankie Howard, who was a comedian who had a program called Up Pompeii. So yeah, so it's kind of fun playing around with language, playing around with character, playing around with history.
I mean, you used the word iconoclastic, and that's, you know, of course, a really strong element. You're I think, interested in reversal, in incongruity. In a certain sense, this is a post-colonial text, but, you know, we're on one level talking about Roman colonialism, and it's England that's a colony, and you've read that quote out. It's not a very dazzling colony at all, right? It's sort of far-flung, it's cold, it's not attractive to be posted there, and that's, one element in Zuleika's life. So the term post-colonial, in a sense, becomes, changed in the process. And Blonde Roots is another example for that, right? Where Bernardine speaks about slavery, where you write slavery, but you rewrite it and you reverse it, as you said. So it's white slaves owned by black people. And so you take on serious topics. Zuleika's predicament, she's married off quite young and she has no say in it. So that's clearly not fun, that's serious. But still, the book works with humor.
It's comi-tragic, It's both, I think. I don't think I'd ever write something that was purely comedic. I also like, Blonde Roots has a lot of satire in it, but there's some very serious moments in this book, which I tend not to read. Like on her wedding night, she's having sex with this man in his 30s, and things happen that are very serious in that society. And in a sense, even though it's historical, I wanted it to feel very contemporary. And we know today that in certain parts of the world, children, girls, 6-year-old, 7-year-old girls in Yemen are married off to big old men, in their 30s, 40s, 50s. So in a sense, even though it's historical, it's contemporary, but also I was drawing parallels between the kinds of things that still exist.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think, as a reader, we are conscious of that. I just wanted to read a quote that came out when The Emperor's Babe appeared. It's from the Publishers Weekly, so like a trade rag, really. But they're calling you a highly liberated and sexual 21st century poet, with reference to creating, Zuleika, who's described as a beautiful, passionate African cum Roman woman as seen through the imagination, of Bernardine Evaristo. And I think you captured what they're referring to here so well in the sections that you read out. Because Zuleika, her dad gives her, sewing to do, and, they want to raise her in a certain traditional sense, and she undermines that, using her body, using her sexuality, and of course, it's the emperor who's courting her, but at the same time, there is a power dynamics that works both ways. So she is a liberated woman, and I remember when I first read the book, I think in 2002, I thought, is this a feminist text or is it actually a provocative text? Will feminists dislike it? You were sort of on the line there, I thought, and I'm still thinking about this. Really,
well,
what's your take on it?
It's interesting because, I am a feminist, but I never think of my literature as feminist. I just don't label it that. Because what I do is I try to stay true to the characters and the story that I want to tell. And I feel that if I apply some kind of feminist agenda to my work, that it will be very clear that that's what I'm doing. So Zuleika, it's interesting because we've been talking about sex and sexuality today, and the sex that Zuleika has with the emperor is very, it's the thing that Monique was talking about, what PIV or something, it is that sort of sex. But that was, in a sense, for me, at that stage that I was writing it, it was the most dramatic way of writing about his conquest of her. But interestingly enough, towards the end of their relationship, she does get on top. And, she kind of, the roles are reversed. So she does gain some currency and power in her relationship with the emperor. So, So there is a sort of counterbalance to the bit that I read, I think. She is feminist because, the feminism is that she's a powerful female character who, as much as she can, overcomes the obstacles put in front of her. And it's also a story about female friendship. So she's got her great childhood friend, Alba, and then she's got Venus, who's a transvestite, who runs a club called Mount Venus down by the docks. And they're like a really tight friendship group who support each other, and without them, her life would be awful.
Those are great scenes, by the way, in the club. Those readings, where you, I think, lampoon people who try and write and can't write. It's really wonderful. you talked about the sex scene just now, and earlier in the day there was a discussion. What is it like, to do that type of work? I mean, so how was that for you when you wrote the book? Was that difficult, or?
The Emperor's based on someone I had had a relationship with. Very nice relationship with. Each book is different, and there's always some sex. I don't think there is in the book I'm working on at the moment, but I do like writing sex scenes, but as I said, I like to do something imaginative with it. So, the bit that you heard was through the food initially, and then through the sort of the lexicon of war and colonialism, the second bit. So to me, that's what's exciting about writing about sex. It's exploring different, original ways of expressing it.
And I think that makes it interesting to read, really, right? So it works on various levels, and it feeds into the narrative.
And it gets deep into someone's sort of subconscious and psyche, a character's subconscious and psyche, I feel.
Yeah, okay. It is, I think, sexuality and that type of interaction between your characters is actually much stronger than I'd realized. So with this seminar, I looked at all of Bernardine's work again, and I saw it fresh. I think on the one hand, that just means, it's good writing. You can look at it, through different lenses, and it comes out strong. But I just realized how much of a theme it actually is.
You mean
gender and sexuality? Yes.
Gender and sexuality. Yeah.
Do you know why that is? I mean, it's part of life. Maybe that's a simple explanation, but why is it such a strong? Is there in Lara? I'm not sure about the early poetry, but it is a strong theme.
Well, I suppose I'm a feminist, and I came of age in the 80s. In my 20s, I was a lesbian. I was running a theatre company. I was very politicized. I'm very much in the tradition of everybody else who's appeared here over the seminar, in that I was always about writing the things that hadn't been written. Mm-hmm. I'm particularly interested in women's stories, but at the same time I have told male stories. So, my novel, Mr. Loverman, is about a gay man, so that was something that I wanted to explore. The new book is exploring women with different sexualities and so on. And I just feel that that's very true. It's just true to who I am, So in British literature, we have of a certain generation. We have Martin Amis, we have Ian McEwan, we have Julian Barnes, so on and so forth. They're not going to write about a black girl growing up in Roman London. They're not going to write about a black Caribbean gay man, who's been in love with his best friend and lovers with him for 60 years. So these are the stories that, that interest me and that come out of my wider culture as a black British person. I'm not Caribbean, I'm Nigerian, half Nigerian. So I think it's inevitable, in a sense, that in drawing on the stories that I want to tell, aspects of British history and the Afro diaspora, my politicization in my 20s and as a teenager, in fact, that it would lead me to produce work that has, that is addressing issues to do with gender, sexuality, and feminism, especially as I came up with the title for this session. Mm-hmm. So these are sort of my preoccupations.
Yes. But you've already, addressed something that I think is quite intriguing, because you have strong female characters, but you've also written men. Jerome, you read Jerome's voice, and you've alluded to Mr. Loverman. So you've got an Antiguan gay couple in London, and as you said, they're in their 70s. So that's clearly, not your background, right? It's a different context, the Caribbean. It's two male voices, they're gay. So in many ways, they're quite removed from you. And Jerome, So does that actually make a difference, in terms of writing? Or is that just another challenge?
Every book is a challenge. Mm-hmm. So I explained why I wrote Hello, Mum. Yeah. And I did a lot of research for the book. I had to, because I didn't have teenage black boys living on estates in my in my life. So I went out and I met with school children, teenage school children, certain parts of London. I went to a pupil referral unit. I recorded the interviews so that I could hear their voices back when I got home. I asked the kind of questions that would give me insight into their lives. So, for example, when I was interviewing the boys in the pupil referral unit, which for those of you who don't know, is a kind of place where children are sent when they're kind of been expelled from school. And these boys were 14 and 15, and they shocked me with the things that they were saying. They felt so alienated from British society. They were in gangs, and then we have these kind of postcode wars in the UK, or we used to have, whereby if people are growing up in one kind of postcode, in one postcode, they're not supposed to go into someone else's territory. And these boys told me, they said it's easier to leave London than to cross it. Because if they cross it and they go into hostile territory, they can get into trouble and they can get beaten up. And I said to them things like, well, who are your role models? And Obama was president at the time. I said, what about Obama? And they had no relationship to Obama. He was like somebody so far removed from their own lives. I said, what about the footballers who were around at the time, the black footballers, and then really their role models are the people who are running the gangs. If they don't have fathers or fathers who are not present in their lives, they're the people on the street who are running the gangs. So that kind of information helped shape this character. So what I wanted to do was to get inside the life of the kind of child who is reported on in the media as, I think people have said, as Kerry said, people have working class people in Britain are vilified by the media, but we don't actually hear from them. So young black boys, especially just a few years ago, were quite prevalent in the media as children who were killing each other, essentially. But I wanted to get inside that voice and to see what his life was like and to express it through his voice. So the whole thing about the living in the flat and there's not space in the flat, so he's claustrophobic, he's a growing boy, he's 14. What do? You go out. Once you go out and you go onto the estate, you're likely to get into trouble. So all these things helped for me build the profile of the character. The fact that he was male, well, Zuleika lives in Roman Britain, so as a writer, I'm not interested in writing myself on the whole. I'm very interested in writing all kinds of narratives that are as far removed from my own experience as possible. And with Mr. Loverman, so he's a gay Caribbean man, and I kind of based him on older Caribbean men who I'd come across. And one of my best friends is a Caribbean woman from Antigua, so it was her voice that I heard. And Sabrina said today, she said, well, I don't know, I just start writing and it happens. And that's how it works for me. So I have an idea of something in my head, I start writing, and then the magic happens, and then the character starts to talk to you. And if you feel if it's exciting, if the character is exciting you, then that may be a book in the end. And so whether it's male or female, black or white, gay or straight, that's always the process.
What generates the ideas? That's what I'm always intrigued by. I mean, I know you grew up in Eltham, not far from there.
Woolwich.
Woolwich, sorry, Woolwich. So not far from there is Greenwich Park. And if you walk through Greenwich Park, you can go to the observatory, but you can also follow the signs to the Roman remains. And you'll be walking and walking, there's lots of signs. When you get there, there's a little fence, and in there is about 2 Roman bricks. And you think, my God, I've been wandering the park for an hour for this. So there's not that much Roman history there. So what gives you this idea? I mean, there are other sites in London, but...
You mean like of the Emperor's Babe?
Yes.
It was reading Peter Fryer's book, Staying Power, The History of Black People in Britain. So I read that book in the 80s. And in fact, other people had written that kind of book earlier, but they're not really remembered. And the first sentence is, there were Africans in Britain before the English came here. Yeah. And it was just, so shocking to imagine that Africans from North Africa had come to Britain. So that was, in a sense, the origin. That was the beginning of me beginning to understand that British history, it has been a multicultural history for at least 2,000 years. And of course, I've done loads of research since, and I'd love to do some medieval stuff and so on. I just haven't found a way into it. So it's really about reimagining British history away from the way in which it has primarily been told. Because from the 16th century, the presence of black people in Britain is very well documented now. And we're getting there as a nation, starting to understand this. And so that was the inspiration, really. It was to say, you know, black people were here 2,000 years ago. And when I wrote the book, the curators at the museum, they said, oh, there weren't any black people in London, though. I said, yes, there were the moors at Hadrian's Wall. There was sort of archaeological evidence for that. But there were no Africans in London, black people in London. So I said, well, the Romans had very good roads. Roman was very multiracial. You know, the Roman Empire stretched over 9,000 miles, right? So why do you think they didn't make it to London? And they said, oh, we haven't got archaeological evidence. So I wrote the book anyway, because I wasn't going to listen to them, because actually, as a fiction writer, you just do your own thing. You know, history will catch up with you eventually. So I wrote the book, and they liked the book. And then they introduced a black Roman merchant's wife into the sort of, they had actors touring the galleries. And so they created this one who was a black Roman merchant's wife. So she was black. And I thought, oh, that's a result, you know, because when I spoke to you, when I was writing the book, they said, oh, no, there were no Africans. And now you can imagine that there might have been. And then the archaeological evidence more recently has been discovered. So I got there before them. And maybe not just me, but, you know, it's the power of the imagination. We're not restricted by facts and evidence. We can do, as writers, we can write what we like, you know.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful story, though, that you're there, you know, before the stuff in the archives is being discovered.
I think it's because they just couldn't get their heads around the fact that there would be black, physically black, maybe Asian, whatever people in London. That's not what they've been taught at university, at school, in you know, all the ways in which we document history. Yeah. So there was a block. You know, they were actually missing a sort of a link in logic, really.
What do you say? We're all excited to hear from your unpublished writing. Is that a good moment now? Yeah. Great, okay.
Oh. This is Nick's. So I'm not going to tell you what this is, and I'm just finishing it, but I thought I'd read it because it's so much in keeping with the sort of theme of this seminar. Amma is, she's a woman in her 50s, she's a theatre director, she's worked in theatre for 30 years, and she's opening a show at the Bankside Theatre, which is really the National Theatre. And so finally, having worked sort of on the fringes, in community theatre, not really making a great success of her life, she's opening a show that she's written and directed at the Bankside Theatre. She's coming home from rehearsal, and she bumps into her friend Sylvester. And Sylvester, I think you'll find out who he is. Sylvester's gay. So how exactly am I selling out? Amma replied to Sylvester's accusation about her gig at Bankside when he cornered her outside crowded Brixton tube station on her way home one evening from rehearsal and persuaded her to have a drink with him at the Ritzy, where they sat in the upstairs bar surrounded by posters of the kinds of independent films they'd been going to see together since they first met as students at drama school. Their relationship built around arguing about them afterwards while getting progressively drunk and vociferous and sometimes falling out. They found a spare table. Amma looked around at the other lefty culture vultures who'd moved into Brixton when it was crime-addled but affordable. These people were her people. They'd lived through 2 riots and were proud of their multiracial social circles and bloodlines, like Sylvester, who'd gone on a pilgrimage there to visit the gay community centre that quickly came and went, where he met the man who would become his life partner, Kerwin, then newly arrived from St. Lucia. They used to make such a striking couple, Sylvester, blonde and pale, Kerwin, light brown and freckled. Sylvester, or Sylvie, as he liked to be called then, spent most of the 80s wearing dresses, his long hair flowing in waves down his back. He said he was out to challenge society's gender expectations long before the current trend. I was a trendsetter, I was there first, he likes to say. Cohen, on the other hand, might wear a turban, kilt, lederhosen, and full makeup when he felt like it, to challenge various other kinds of expectations, he said. Sylvester's now grey, balding, newly bearded, and is never seen in anything other than a threadbare Mao suit these days, which he claims is an original from eBay. Two young city slicker types sat at the table next to them, looking slightly awkward and very incongruous with their office haircuts, smooth cheeks, crisp suits, and shiny shoes. Amma and Sylvester exchanged looks. They hated the interlopers who were colonizing the neighborhood and patronized the champagne bars and shishi eateries that now replaced a stretch of the indoor market, previously known for stalls selling parrotfish, yam, tins of ackee, Scotch bonnet peppers, African materials, black wigs and weaves, religious paraphernalia, Dutch pots, cheap mobile phones, cocoa butter, giant Nigerian land snails, and pickled green eggs from China. These upmarket places also employed security guards to keep the locals out, because while their clientele loved slumming it in SW2 or SW9, they couldn't hide the fact that SW1 and SW3 was in their DNA. Sylvester was very active in the Keep Brixton Real campaign. He'd not lost none of his revolutionary zeal, which wasn't always a good thing. Amma sipped her 7th coffee of the day, this one laced with whiskey, while Sylvester slugged beer from a bottle, the only way a radical should drink it, he'd once told her. Sylvester still ran his socialist theatre company, the 97%, which toured to fringe venues and hard-to-reach communities, which she should also still be doing, he said, as he launched into his agenda. Amma, you should be taking your plays to church halls and libraries, not to the establishment bastards at the bankside. She replied that the last library she took a show to, the audience was mainly made up of homeless people escaping the cold streets who were sleeping at best, snoring at worst. It was about 15 years ago, and she vowed never to again. Social inclusion is more important than success, or should it be called sick-cess, Sylvester replied. And Amma couldn't convince him that she was right to move on to bigger things, as he kept knocking back the beers she paid for. Well, you must be earning a lot now you've had the big time. She argued it was her right to be directing at the bankside, and it was the theatre's job to make sure they attracted audiences beyond the middle-class day trippers from the home counties Sylvester scorned. She stopped herself from adding this must also include his parents, a retired banker and financial consultant from Berkshire, who came to London for its culture, parents who'd always supported him, even when he came out. He'd once let slip while drunk that he got a monthly allowance. She was far too nice to ever remind him of this. The thing is, she said, troublemaking on the periphery is all well and good, but we also have to make a difference inside the mainstream. It's our right to be given a platform because, after all, we all pay taxes that fund these theatres, right? Sylvester offered up the smug expression of a tax-dodging outlaw. At least I do now, she said, and you should. He sat back, his eyes watery from the beers, silently judging her. She knew that look. The drink was about to bring out a viciousness otherwise absent from her good friend. Admit it, Ams, you've dropped your principles for ambition, and you're now establishment with a capital E, he said. You're a turncoat. I'm very disappointed in you. She stood up, gathered up her patchwork sling bag, and left the premises. At the cash point a little further down the high street, she looked back and saw him leaning against the wall of the Ritzy, rolling up a cigarette. Still rolling up. You stay there, Sylv, you stay there. Amma walked home in the fading light. She felt sad that Sylvester couldn't celebrate her breakthrough, whether he agreed with her career moves or not, especially when so many of those they'd come up with had long ago retrained to become psychotherapists, school teachers, social workers. They shared so much history together. Sylvester had joined the Brixton Fairies theatre group while still at drama school. He told her about a black feminist group he'd heard about who met weekly in the area. I think you need to go, Amma. She nervously walked up to the building for her first feminist meeting, tentatively knocked on the door, which was opened by a woman called Elaine, roughly the same age, complexion, and height as herself, sporting a perfect halo of an afro, her smooth limbs clad tightly in light blue denim jeans and denim shirt. Amma fancied Elaine on sight. She followed her into the main room, where Black and Asian women were sitting on sofas, chairs, cushions, cross-legged on the floor, drinking coffee and beers. She nervously accepted cigarettes as they were passed around. She listened keenly as they debated what it meant to be a black woman in a British society that was so sexist and racist it was impossible not to become politicized. What it meant to be a feminist when white feminist organizations made them feel unwelcome. How it felt when people spat at them in the street or called them names. Some had even been beaten up. They talked about what it was like when white men opened doors or gave up their seats on public transport for white women, which was sexist, but not for them, which was racist. She began to join in with the refrains of, "We hear you, sister. We've all been there, sister." They spoke about their campaigns for equality, their delegations against police brutality, and to the council to challenge services that put black families at the end of the queue. At the end of her first evening, the other women said their goodbyes, and Amma offered to stay behind to wash up the cups and ashtrays with Elaine. And with her burgeoning bedding skills, honed by seducing half the women at drama school, she and Elaine made love on one of the bumpy sofas in the glow of the streetlight to the accompaniment of police sirens herring by. It was her first experience with a black woman. It was the closest she'd come to making love to herself. It wasn't a good move. Elaine was already lovers with Priya, another member of the group who'd been absent that night, but turned up the next week clearly aware of what had transpired, and who sat on Elaine's knee throughout the meeting while giving Amma the filthiest of looks. Meanwhile, Elaine ignored her. Amma never went back, but she acknowledges how that meeting marked the beginning of her transition from a raped teenage drama student, unable to articulate her disgruntlement with society, to the first imaginings of herself as a black feminist who could be part of a community. In the first year of running Bushwoman Theatre, Amma supplemented her income by working in a wimpy in Piccadilly Circus, selling hamburgers, rumoured to have some kind of animal in it, with onions, dehydrated and resurrected, rubbery cheese, milk-free, possibly concocted in a laboratory, ketchup, radioactive red, and chips as nutritional as cardboard, all of which she also ate in her breaks, free, which gave her spots. And, most offensively, she had to wear a nasty orange nylon suit and hat, and hated it when the customers saw a uniformed slave to do their bidding, and not her wonderful, artistic, highly individualistic self. She befriended the teenage rent boys, Ryan, Julian, Wilberforce, Emeka, Tom, who solicited around the station and inside its toilets. Runaways, homeless, they told her about the politicians and famous actors who were regulars, while she slid them free meals and the crusty pies filled with apple-flavoured lumps of sugar they all loved so much. Then, for the next few years, she found herself attending some of their funerals. They didn't realise that unprotected sex meant a dance with death. Nobody did. It was the 80s.
Right, that was great. We should throw this open to the audience, but of course I have to find out from you, when will this come out? Do you know yet? Oh, God. Maybe you can help me out here.
All I can say is there are lots of characters, and she's one of them.
All right.
There's about 12 main characters.
Yeah, okay. Sounds amazing. Right, so we've had a good chat so far. I think this may just be a moment to throw it open to the audience. We have about 10 minutes left until the club event later. Are there any questions out there? Yes, over there, Ingrid.
I would just like to know, have you given up playing with history for good? Because you're now concentrating on aspects of contemporary society.
The new book is historical. The new book is historic. A lot of it is very contemporary, but most of the characters have got history. So it's historical and contemporary, but it's straightforward history. It's no.
Okay.
I can't repeat myself. I have to do new things.
I was just meaning you're not going far back into history as
not at the moment.
Okay.
All right. And yes.
Hi, Bernadine. Yeah, a bit of a hand grenade I'm going to throw in here, but just you said something about I think anyone, writers can write anything. And obviously there's recently, you hear writers say the exact opposite, that, there's, well-known editor said recently, I question that writers can write anything. And I'm just wondering, it does seem a very polarised debate. Where do you see this debate going? Could you comment a bit about this? You've done so much historical research, taken so many risks. I love what you were saying about, because I noticed you were saying about a pudding bowl haircut. I love what you were saying about irreverence and mashing up history and mixing up this kind of classical history. I just wonder where you think this debate, which is so polarised, might go.
Well, I'm all for artistic freedom, right? So I do believe that anybody should be able to write anything and in any voice. Obviously, they've got to pull it off. So that's the issue, But then there are issues to do with authenticity. If you talk about an authentic type of person, then you're reducing, perhaps, I don't know, gay men or black women or whatever sort of character you're writing to some essential characteristics that are shared. You're homogenizing them. So we have to question whether something can be authentic. And writers, of course, write across all kinds of demographics. When we watch television drama, we'll have black characters and white characters and old characters and young characters. So are they talking about fiction? Are they talking about literary fiction? Are they saying that only black people can write black characters? Does that mean all fiction by white people has to be all white? Is that what they're saying? Have no black characters? You see what I mean? So if you take their logic to the extreme, then it doesn't make sense. So I do think people should be able to write, and I love it when writers who are white, like Juno, for example, write integrated fiction. I think it's fantastic. So I think that's what I would advocate. But sometimes you have to do your research. So I wrote about a gay Caribbean man. Since writing the book, I met gay Caribbean men of his generation, but I didn't know them before. But I've known lots of Caribbean people for over 30 years. So in a sense, I've been kind of semi-steeped in Caribbean culture as an adult. So that then made it, the book, people have told me it's very authentic. They believe it, let's put it that way. They believe him, they believe the story. If I was coming out of, let's say I was an Oxford Don, and I didn't know any people of colour and hardly ever taught any people of colour, then it might be very hard for me to write an authentic gay Caribbean man growing up in Hackney. So who's working class and comes from Antigua and his wife's church woman and so on. So yeah, so it's a big issue, but I think we have to be open to all possibilities.
Just there in the middle, row 6, yeah.
Hi, thank you, Bernadine. It was incredibly riveting just hearing the variety of your work. But I just wanted to ask a question specifically about Hello, Mom, because I know that character is very specific with regards to the young man that you were portraying and I guess the demographic of that young man. So you obviously had to do incredible amounts of research. I was just interested to know if you had any premeditated ideas of what you wanted the book to kind of explore and the end result you wanted before you wrote the book, because you kind of alluded to the fact that there is a particular narrative of that group of young men out at the particular time when you wrote the book, and you obviously did extensive research to be able to perhaps tell it from a different narrative. So did you have an agenda as to what you wanted to
I was
achieve?
very open. I think that's sometimes the best thing, because it's a very short book, it's a novella, and I was just very open. I just wanted to listen to them. To find out what, I didn't know what the story was going to be, so I needed to talk to them to find out. And I'm aware that there are other writers who have written that demographic. That there are, in particular, a couple of black male British writers who have written about young black men quite a few years ago on the streets. So I was aware that I was writing, which is very unusual for me, writing to a stereotype, if you like. But then I hope that what I do with the character is that I give people insight into where he's coming from and who he is, and that kind of compensates for the fact that he is a recognizable figure in British society, kind of disenfranchised black teenage boys. But then in Mr. Loverman, I have a character called Daniel, who's also a teenager, and in a sense, he was a sort of counterpoint to JJ. So Daniel is privately educated by his mum, and he's very posh, and he wants to go to Oxford, and he wants to go to Harvard, and he wants to be Prime Minister. So he's a young black boy who we don't see much of at all, who's very bright, very aspirational, growing up with a lot of privilege, but comes from an ordinary working class background, essentially, but growing up with a lot of privilege.
Okay, thank you very much. And just last, did you hear from any of those young people, and particularly the parents, which is again another part of the story that we don't tend to hear, because obviously you kind of wrote that sort of addressing a letter to the mom. Kind of some parents might not have a clue that actually some of their children have that type of angst and kind of expression based on the way the society kind of marginalized them, and in some cases the parents themselves. So did you hear any kind of...
I did.
Right.
I did. I got a lot of response to that book. I got a lot of, people got in touch with me, and it's one of my most popular books, in fact. So I did hear from people whose children had got into trouble, and it was also like the big read for Suffolk in 2010. So everybody in Suffolk was reading it, and I did a tour of prisons and young offender institutes. So I found myself in the situation of me being me in a young offender institute, putting on that voice, writing these characters of somebody who gets into trouble to people who are a slightly older version of him. And they're all just sitting there. And I was like, oh my God, this is surreal. But they liked the book. And they were trying to steal it. So they were sticking it, because we were, I don't know what they had a bunch of them. And they were like sticking them down the backs of their trousers as they were leaving. And the screws were like kind of pulling them aside and stuff. So I thought that was a compliment. But it was quite surreal, to be presenting themselves to themselves, sort of thing.
I would agree. If they steal your books, that definitely is a compliment. We're almost out of time. We have 1 or 2 minutes. I wanted to ask, have we got any tweeted questions? Because this is live streamed, how would that work? You would let us know if that was the case. All right. There was a hand over there, just there, yeah.
So in general, what are the difficulties and obstacles you face doing research? And then, so just personal difficulty you have had, and then how did you overcome those things?
For which work?
I mean, in general, you did a lot of extensive research. I mean, every writer do it, but you particularly did a lot more heavily research. Yeah, it sounds like. So in general, what sort of difficulties you have and how to overcome them? Yeah.
That's a really big question, really.
Yeah, I know. Just as in general.
I wrote The Emperor's Babe before the internet really took off. So I only really had books to rely on. And now you can go on the internet and you can have sort of 3D experiences, you can have video experiences of reconstructed Roman villas and so on and so forth. And I wish that I'd had that for The Emperor's Babe. But I don't know. For me, the pleasure of research is struggling with finding the material and then being able to sort of transform it into the story that I'm telling. So my verse novel, Lara, which is based on my family history, that involved going to Nigeria to research my father's childhood and ancestry, and to Brazil to research my grandfather's. That was difficult because I don't speak Portuguese, and most people don't speak English there, or they didn't in the 90s. So there are always challenges, but I enjoy those challenges.
I think we should call it a day, if you're okay with that, because I'm getting a sign here in terms of the time. It's past. Bernadine, it was a pleasure as ever to talk to you, to listen to you. Thank you for your questions, and let's put our hands together for Bernadine Evaristo.